Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I want to cover, there's so many facts that have come out, and there's still more facts that come out when the topic of discussion is the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. I mean, it's something you could probably dedicate your whole career to studying this particular aspect of history. And the details that come out, it's never ending. Some things that are pretty shocking, some things it's just like, oh, I didn't know that. So I came across this, actually it's an old article I had lying around some years ago. And I says, well, this probably be good, you know, if we want to know what some of the things that went on during the slave trade, it's a with the development in the internet, there's so much information available these days. It's just, you pick the topic you're interested in and just have at it. A couple of things that have fascinated me about this whole study is, as I said, when I started studying the thing about Brazil way back at the end of 1999, early 2000, I always ask myself, I says, why is it that we don't know this information? Why is it that, okay, in some ways I can understand that, if you're from the United States, of course, a lot of the stuff that you're going to be familiar with is going to be stuff that comes out of United States history. But when you want to learn about what happened with enslaved Africans, and you learn that these Africans were shipped to all parts of the northern, the what they call the New World. If you really have a fascination in it, then Brazil would be like a treasure hunt, just when you discover just how many people were sent to Brazil, how long the slave era lasted there, how Brazil was the last country to abolish slavery. And it's like, wow, why don't we learn about Brazil in terms of Black history? Because there's a lot to go through there. Over this is not a new discussion, but recently the discussion has really picked up. I say in the last 5 years or so, this discussion about, reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, whether or not that's something that's legitimately going to happen, I tend to think, now I can't see it really happening. The details that come along with it are pretty intriguing. And one of the conversations that I've heard people talk about is how, United States gets perhaps millions of, immigrants that come into the country every year. And a great percentage of those immigrants are going to be Black people from other countries. So the question comes down and says, well, should Black people coming from other countries, if there ever was a such thing as, the idea of really creating a reparations, a system of, whatever payments or some type of, how could we say, there's several different ways you could set up a way to put reparations in place. It doesn't necessarily just have to be financial. There's several ways you could, approach the issue. But let's say we were talking financially. Okay. There was just some lump payment for everybody who can prove they're a descendant of an African slave from however many years ago. So then when you have a large percentage of Black immigrants coming over, the question is going to be, okay, should these people be able to get a piece of the pie that comes from the discussion of reparations for slavery? A lot of people come, say, well, I'm from Trinidad. There was slavery there. I'm from Jamaica. Where's my reparations? I'm from Haiti, and wherever it might be. So my thing has been, people coming into the United States, all of these countries, whether they're in the Caribbean or South America, if there's a discussion of reparations, it should be with the country that they came from. That's the way I look at it. This is a discussion that's going on in Brazil. I don't think the discussion is as far along as it is in the United States, but it is a discussion. I have a couple of articles on the blog that talk about this. This one right here says, entity searches for justice, a billion, like $1 billion, or we'll say real being the Brazilian currency, for reparations for slavery. Okay. You have the BBC Brazil, the controversial debate about reparations for slavery in Brazil. So it's an ongoing dialogue, not just in the United States. Um, so that's my take on it. If people come to the United States and they're descendants of enslaved Africans, I do believe that they should look towards the country where they came from, because the United States is not the only country that slavery took place. It took place throughout the entire Americas. If you really want to look at just like a dollar amount, or in this case, I say a Brazilian moeda, the coin is called the real, the currency in Brazil. If it ever came down to truly breaking down how much money should be paid for something like reparations, Black Brazilians would be the ones who would stand to gain the most, because Brazil received by far the most enslaved Africans of all the countries. It's estimated that uh, Africans were destined for Brazil. There were, like, estimates are saying about 5 million now. If you take that estimate and look at the estimate of those that ended up United States, somewhere about 400,000, we're looking at anywhere from 10 to 12 times more enslaved Africans were sent to Brazil than the United States. So Brazil should be the country that people should be watching, in terms of if there's a historic debt to be paid to the descendants of enslaved Africans. Okay. That's not even really the topic of today's discussion. It's another topic that I wanted to get into that today, talking about near the end of slavery, 60% of Black people brought to Brazil were actually children. Let's get directly into this story, because the title alone is something that's intriguing. So today's article is courtesy of the UOL Brazil website, and it's written by Caetano Manenti. And that's the article that I'm going to take a look at today. This here picture, there are a lot of depictions of slavery in artwork that you can find on the internet. This is perhaps one of the most famous ones that you'll see. In 1835, illustration shows the bottom deck of a slave ship. It is estimated that more than 660,000 enslaved Africans died on the way between Africa and Brazil. And remember, the distance between the west coast of Africa and Brazil was much further than the coast between Africa and the coast of the United States. So some historians have come to the theory that for Brazil, it was easier. No, I'm sorry, wait. The distance between Brazil and the west coast of Africa was closer than the west coast of Africa with the United States. So I want to make sure I said that right. Some historians have theorized that because the distance was shorter from Africa to Brazil than Africa to the United States, that the Portuguese and then the Brazilians figured, hey, it takes less time for a slave to get here, thus we'll have to pay less money. They would just burn a slave out until he died and just brought in more. Whereas, from what historians are saying, those people that were enslaved in the United States had longer lives, because the price of the slave was much more because of the distance of the voyage over the Atlantic Ocean. It would be pricier to replace that slave rather than just, quote unquote, take care of them, because we know about the brutality in slavery. Okay. Anyway, just a little tidbit from the slave history. So I want to get into this article for today. Brazil and Portugal are at the top of a ranking that brings nothing to be proud of. The two countries are the main protagonists of the Slave Voyages website, where 29,000 transatlantic crossings are cataloged, which carried 9 million slaves. In total, boats flying the flag of Brazil and Portugal transported 5.8 million slaves. In second place in the number of slaves traded to the Americas is the United Kingdom, with 3.3 million slaves, especially destined for Jamaica. So the difference that I see here is that you have the Portuguese. You look at these numbers here, and it's saying 5.8 million. Of course, we know a large percentage of those slaves actually died. So those making it to Brazil alive, is the estimates say about 4.8 million, like 5 million. So the British brought in 3.3 million enslaved Africans and distributed them through the Caribbean and the United States. Whereas as Brazil, the only nation of the Portuguese Empire that was in the Americas was Brazil. So all five 4.8 million enslaved Africans were sent to Brazil, whereas the 3.3 million brought in by the British were distributed throughout the Caribbean and the United States. Okay. This map here just shows the main slave traffic routes between Africa and Brazil. And this is what I was talking about. You see from the map that West Africa is a lot closer to Brazil than it is to the east coast of the United States, which makes sense when they're saying, when we look at enslaved Africans as like merchandise and they're looking at them as property from a financial economic standpoint, it does make more sense. Okay, well, I can't say that it makes more sense because we're talking about human beings here. But when you look at something that's considered property, if you were to change that and say, okay, whatever product you're bringing in from Africa and the voyage is a lot shorter and takes a shorter time period than if it was going to the United States, economically, they're going to look at it like, okay, we can make far more voyages for the same thing than if it was being sent to the United States, where it would cost more because it'd be longer time on the ocean or in the ocean. Okay. So the Truth Commission on Black Slavery of the Brazilian Bar Association of Rio de Janeiro opened its work on April 13, 2015, and requested the assistance of the U.S. consulate in bringing the researchers responsible for the site to Brazil in the following months. Okay. This is a little citation that I took from a source online. Brazil was the greatest importer of Africans throughout all of the period of the slave trade. This country received 38% of the effective total of Africans introduced into the New World, 38%. Then in the area of the Caribbeans, the Antilles, there was another 36%. So between Brazil and the Caribbean, you got about 74% of all enslaved Africans went to these areas. Then you have places like the United States, you have Mexico, you have just numerous countries, divided between British America, Portuguese America, Spanish America, and then you have smaller numbers in the French Americas. The numbers show that there was a strong increase in the number of young slaves traded in the last years of slavery in Brazil, precisely when abolitionist laws intensified. In the 200 years prior to 1841, for example, the proportion of children on slave ships was 7.6%. In the last 15 years of this period alone, the index jumped to 59.5%. So there's a increase in the number of how many enslaved Black children were brought to Brazil. In the illegal period of trafficking from 1831, it was easier for the trafficker to move a large number of slaves from one region to another if they were children, since there was less resistance to slavery among them, explains historian Daniel da Silva, a member of the group linked to Emory University in Atlanta that has been conducting the study since the 1960s. The database enables new registrations of partner researchers. The platform is divided into two. One part exposes the numbers of documents already obtained. The other makes projections through demographic calculations. Here's another image portrayed of a Brazilian family in Rio de Janeiro by Jean-Baptiste Debré from 1839. You see the Black children here. The current estimate points out that 45% of slaves headed to the Americas came to Brazil. Now, that's a bigger number because I've always read the number that says 38% of all enslaved Africans were sent to Brazil. They're saying 45% here. This means that 5.5 million Blacks were brought to the country by force. According to calculations, 12% of them did not land here. It is estimated that more than 660,000 died before the end of the trip. So that could explain the difference between 45% and the 38% that I've been accustomed to saying. The main slave routes are also detailed on the website. Slaves brought in the African nation of Benin had a port of Salvador Bahia in Brazil's northeast as their most common destination. For Senegambia came the slaves who would work in the cotton cycle in the northeastern state of Maranhão, another Brazilian state in the northeast. The rebellion rate of these Africans, many of them Muslims, was high. Here's another image by Jean-Baptiste Debré, a slave market in Brazil. Only in the 19th century did the port of Rio de Janeiro become the continent's absolute leader in landed slaves. The expressive majority came from Luanda, the capital of Angola. The year 1829 was the most intense year of trade in Brazil, with an estimated 79,000 new slaves, with rowing and sailing. The brigantine became the type of vessel that most brought Africans to the country. The study also shows the sadism in the names of many of these boats, such as Charity, Feliz Destino, meaning happy destination, Feliz Sociedade, meaning happy society, and Esperanza, meaning hope. So you're carrying human beings that have been enslaved, and you're going to call them happy destination, happy society, and hope. Sadistic. It is true. Some documents help Brazilians to suppose what their own names might be like if it were not for the mandatory baptism here. In 1826, Bozo, Tozu, Boya, and D left Benin for Salvador. In 1832, that's Salvador Bahia again, was considered the Black Rome. The center of African culture in Brazil is recognized as Salvador Bahia, which I was just mentioning here. In 1832, Muamba, Malungu, Goma, and Bungu left Luanda destined for Rio de Janeiro. Christian baptism and slavery always go together in this story. The slave had to be baptized, says historian Ivana Stolzi from the Fundação Casa de Rui Barbosa, or the Casa de Rui Barbosa Foundation. Rui Barbosa is an intriguing figure in Brazilian history because he is known to have ordered the burning of any documents having to do with slavery. So imagine how much information we would have about slavery in Brazil if he hadn't ordered the burning of all of these documents, right? Somebody on YouTube was talking about the history of slave children, and this is for one of their classes here. The foundation, in partnership with the Pontifical Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro, was in the process of translating the study into Portuguese to put it online in October 2015, when it would launch its own website on the memory of slavery and abolition. In addition to the public, Casa Fundação, Fundação Casa Foundation, also has the mission of offering material to teachers and thus training researchers, says Lucia Maria Veloso, head of the archive. Okay, I want to again point out that this article was courtesy of UOL Noticias. It's a great website with so many different varied topics that you can find if you're a person who can read Portuguese, or you got plenty of translation tools out these days. But anyway, this is the piece I wanted to discuss today. I'm curious to know what your opinion was, what you thought as you were listening to this article. So with that said, I'm going to end the video here. I'm going to ask for you to, like this video, share this video, consider subscribing to the channel if you've seen more than a few videos that you found intriguing. Consider subscribing to the channel. Click on the notification bell so that you receive the videos as fast as I put them up. If you felt like this article was worth something, definitely consider dropping a super thanks, or maybe just contributing to my my Cash App at Mr. Marcus 72. That's MrMarques 72. And with that said, I'm going to end this video here and invite you all to come out and check out the next video that I post.